How's everyone doing? Happy Pride. If you're local, thank you for celebrating Pride. If you're from out of town, welcome to Washington, D.C., and welcome to the Library of Congress. We are very grateful that you're here tonight, that you're still supporting the Library of Congress. We've gone through a lot this past month, so we're very happy that you're here tonight with us for our Live at the Library. As I mentioned, it's Pride Month, so it's very important to us that here at the library, as the largest library in the world, we want to make sure that you see yourself in the library's collection. So I'm hoping before you walked in here, you were able to see some of the collection items on display. Right before Jonathan Capehart, we had Thomas Mallon, who discussed his diaries. The library has his diaries and his papers, which includes drafts of his novel. But we have a double header tonight, so we are so excited to welcome not only Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, but he's now a New York Times bestseller, Jonathan Capehart. So, and I'm hoping that you were able to see next door in the room, we have some collection items from prominent African-American journalists, some items from Newark, New Jersey. So it's like Jonathan's This Is Your Life in that room. So. But as a reminder, the Library of Congress, again, is the largest library in the world with more than 181 million items, and it has the items from George Washington to Rosa Parks to Abraham Lincoln to Jonathan Larson to Oscar Hammerstein to Leonard Bernstein. That's just the tip of the iceberg, and that's what we're here for. We want to elevate the library's collection. That's why we want to welcome everyone here to the library to make sure that you know that the Library of Congress is not only the library for Congress, it's also for their constituents back home. So thank you again. So without further ado, please welcome Jonathan Capehart and MSNBC's Michelle Norris. Thank you.
Aren't we fortunate that we get to be in this beautiful space with this beautiful human being?
Oh, thank you.
Jonathan is a colleague and a friend and an inspiration and a source of merriment in my life. And so it's really special to be with him tonight, and especially to talk about Hold the Book Up. Yet here I am, yet here it is. And it's fun for two nerdy kids who are now grown up to sit and talk together. We were both book kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think we both spent a lot of time in libraries.
Yes. Yes, I did. It's been a long time, but yes, I spent a lot of time in libraries and bookstores.
Yes, yes. And I'm a total library kid. It was free, and they had air conditioning. So it was a nice place to spend summers. And I'm so happy for you for the success of this book. I'm so proud of you for the effort, because we talked several times as you were pushing that rock up the hill, and I think it might be your best production.
Oh, well, great. Thank you. I'm going to put that on the back.
So I'm going to be referring, for those of you who are wondering, why does she have this big book? Jonathan sent me, this is a galley, and he sent it to me early, so that's why I have this big version of the book.
I sent you a digital. Was it a digital version of the galley?
They sent me this also, but for
that?
old eyes, this is really nice to have a New York telephone directory style book. And so what I wanted to do with this conversation is to talk about three themes that jumped out to me in the book: people, places, and promise. The people who shaped you, the places that helped make you the wonderful person that you are today, and the promise that people recognized early on, maybe didn't see fully, the promises that you've made to yourself. So you okay with that?
Yeah, this sounds great.
I always like to have sort of an architecture for the conversation. So I want to begin, before we get into that, is why you decided to write this particular kind of book. Because I think at one point you were thinking of a slightly different direction, that it wasn't necessarily going to be memoir, where you were going to be more outward-looking, but you decided to be much more introspective. So how did you land on this book?
Well, it was always going to be a memoir, but I think this is the third iteration. The first two iterations...
Each one required a trip to Italy.
Yes, of course. But it had much more, the first two versions had much more of, as you said, an outward focus, news-facing focus, tying my story more completely to what was happening in the news. And by the time I got to the third iteration, I leaned more heavily into the two inspirations that were, I had one on each shoulder as I was writing. The first one was Katharine Graham. When I read her memoir, Personal History, 20-something years ago, I was so impressed that this woman, who was the most powerful woman in journalism and one of the most powerful women in the country, had written a memoir so personal, so revealing, so introspective. She was unafraid to show her insecurities and vulnerabilities and what she made of them. That I thought, this is the kind that's a memoir. That's the kind of memoir people
Have you
should.
all read Katharine Graham's memoir? So there will be a syllabus for the evening, noting things that you might want to go and find. And you're absolutely right. We both worked for her at different points, and she was very guarded in her life. But in that book, she totally opened up and talked about things that people maybe whispered about but didn't know. And certainly people didn't understand her insecurities because she carried herself in a way that suggested that she was always in control.
Right. For instance, her fraught relationship with her mother that comes right at the beginning of the book. So I have Katharine Graham, Mrs. Graham, on this shoulder. Fast forward 20 years, and Charles Blow comes out with his memoir, Fire Shut Up in My Bones. And in reading that, once again, raw, honest, introspective, and I just thought, I have such a clearer understanding of Charles and the passion that fueled his columns for the New York Times that, I just thought, if I write a book, those two will be my foundation in terms of how to do it. And then once I started writing, my friend Richie Jackson he had just come out with his book, Gay Like Me, and it was a book from him to his gay son. And it's also raw, honest, open, introspective. And we were staying with them one 4th of July weekend, and he said to me, as we were talking, writers talk about what to do, and he said to me, Jonathan, make sure to put yourself on every page. It's very important that you put yourself on every page. So with those three as my foundation, I set about turning various versions of this book into what you have read and I hope all of you will read.
How did you write? Longhand, on a computer? Did you have to be at a desk with the ocean in the distance? Or did you just find Toni Morrison wrote on the subway in a yellow legal pad, because that's when she had time to write. How did you do this?
It's sort of all of the above. So the initial stories that are the opening chapters of this book, I started writing in 2017. First Trump administration, I felt like I needed to get off the Trump train of news, but I had these stories in my head from my childhood of going down south and spending summers with my grandmother, my grandparents, and so I just sat down and started writing on the computer. Fast forward to last year, or now 2 years ago, my husband Nick, who is here, gave me for my birthday some beautiful notebooks by Pennider. And so we were out at Martha's Vineyard, and it was going to be my moment to really sit down, and I thought, I can't possibly spend an entire month hunched over a computer at the picnic table. I'm going to use this notebook. And so I just started writing longhand, and I'm that nerdy kid who liked the stationery section of the pharmacy.
Me too.
There's nothing better than a clean, fresh notebook.
If you meant it, then you should have put a stamp on it.
Right. So I just started writing, just like, well, I'll just jot down some thoughts. Next thing I know, this notebook is almost filled. And so when I got to perhaps the most important, the most emotionally searing chapter for me, I was writing longhand, first on my phone, Google Docs. I start columns here. And then I transferred over to the notebook. I was in Tuscany at the time with a beautiful view. And then I spent 5 days after this conference I was attending in Rome at my favorite hotel on a balcony, still writing longhand and then transferring from longhand into the computer, editing along the way. But it was important to me to be in a place that was comfortable, that meant a lot to me, a place where I felt at home. And so, yeah, Italy is one of those places I've been to many times to to write. Martha's Vineyard, just anywhere. I mean, I'm no Toni Morrison with the yellow legal pad on the subway, but with my phone, as soon as an idea hits or phrasing or a word, I'll jump on my phone.
It's a wonderful way to just capture things, because otherwise you lose it.
Right.
Sometimes if you don't write it down
Yeah.
right away, even if you're doing it with your thumbs. So let's start with the people in your life. And the book begins with father figures. It begins with your father, who you really got to know as a young man, basically through memories and pictures.
Right. Other people's memories. So my father died when I was 4 months old, so I never knew him. And as I write in the opening paragraph of the book, my first vision of my father was a photo of him in his flag-draped coffin on top of my grandparents' television. And so for me, and it was my mother, it was just me and my mom until she remarried when I was 16. So in writing this book, I realized I guess, cast about for father figures. And probably the biggest one, my Uncle McKinley, who worked at NBC and set me on the path that I'm on now. Other father figures ended up being people who were my bosses. My first boss out of college was the president of my alma mater. I went to Carleton in Minnesota, and they had a fellowship for graduating seniors, and I got it. And so I spent a year working for Steve Lewis. And Steve Lewis is still a very good friend. He's not even a boss anymore. He's a good friend. He still emails me from at least once a week or so. Another father figure was another Carleton grad, Tom Morgan, class of '49, who had been appointed by Mayor Dinkins to run WNYC when the city of New York owned the radio and television stations. Another father figure was this just unbelievably elegant man named Ed Gardner, who he and his wife, they like to joke that they picked me up in an elevator after we left a mutual friend.
They kind of did.
They kind of did. We leave this holiday party on the Upper East Side, and we're waiting for the elevator, and the friend, his name is Tony Hoyt, and he introduces us, Ed, Arlen, this is Jonathan, and we get on the elevator, and as the elevator door is closing, he says, and he helped get Mike Bloomberg elected, and Bloomberg had just been elected mayor. And as the door closes, and Ed is like 6'4", 6'5", and his wife, Arlen, is like 5'3", 5'4", and they're an unbelievably elegant, glamorous couple, and she turns to me right when the door closes, and he says that, and she says, hello. And I think we were only on the 3rd floor, but by the time we got to the ground floor, we were just chattering away, and they said, hey, can we give you a ride? I said, I'm going downtown, way downtown for dinner. He goes, oh no, we're going to a dinner a block away. The driver's just gonna sit there. He'll drop us off, and then he'll take you downtown, and then he'll come back for us. So, oh, sure. And so that began a 2-decade friendship where Ed, and I'll wrap this story up about Ed Gardner. When I got the call from the Washington Post, like, hey, why don't you come down and meet with the Ed board? The night before, we had dinner. And like good New Yorkers, they did not cook. So we were at a fabulous restaurant, and they peppered me with questions, as they always did at dinner. What's this job? What are you going to be writing? Who are the people? All of the questions. And then when I answered all the questions I could possibly answer, Ed said to me, I'm going to talk to you like a father because you're like a son to me. And I just melted in that moment because no one had said that to me before. And then he proceeded to tell me why he thought I should take the job. And sadly, Ed passed away. He was 81, I believe. It was during COVID, but not from COVID. But I guess I'm going on and on about Ed Gardner because I was in Austin on the book tour on Tuesday. Today's Thursday? Yeah, on Tuesday. And who is in the audience but Ed Gardner's daughter? And so I read the passage about him, and it was just so special. But yeah, these are people who saw things in me that I could not see myself. But that's the beauty of mentors and father figures, especially for younger people, to say to them, hey, look, you have this potential. Look, pay attention to these things. Or look, straighten up.
Yeah, you need that village all around you, hands all around you, and you need it not just when you're young, but really all throughout life.
Yeah.
And you also write, not that you're settling scores, but you also write about people who had an influence on you, even though it didn't feel good at the time.
Negative. I think it would be
Didn't feel good at the time. And I'm thinking of your stepfather. Your mother married again, and there was a scene that really broke my heart, having watched your mother and knowing how close the two of you are. You damaged. Let me get the story right. You damaged a wall.
Oh, yes.
And your stepfather insisted that you owed him, was it $348?
Well, so there's two things.
Okay, so
money is always
let me get to the question, then you can answer.
Okay.
So there was a debt that had to be paid by a young person who was working in a minimum wage job. So basically, all of the money that you were bringing home was going to him. Your graduation money was going to him. And there's a scene that you describe where your mother, in tears, says, "This is the way it has to be."
Yeah. So this particular scene is when I'm doing laundry and have a laundry basket piled with clothes, and you have to walk sort of through, not through the kitchen, but by the kitchen to get to the stairs to go down to the basement. And it's one of those tricky things where there's a light switch over here, but you gotta hook your foot around, and I couldn't see, and so I hooked my foot around and knocked down a rifle that was, had always been sitting there on the side.
Old rifle.
An old rifle, which my then stepfather, because he is a former stepfather, thought I did it on purpose and said, when you graduate from college, you are going to pay me $348 for this specific gun to replace that one because that one was irreplaceable because that one was given to him by his father. And I just jokingly said, well, you can't, what if I'm working a minimum wage job? I couldn't possibly pay you right away. And he thought I was being serious and said, oh, you think this is funny? You're going to pay me right now. And my mom, we were having dinner at the table, and I'll never forget it. It's the one time I have seen my mother cry. And we're going back and forth, and I'm looking to my mother for, to come to the rescue, and she just sat there. I remember a tear coming down her face, and she just said, pay him. My former stepfather was someone, I write about this, and to your point, there are people in your life or who come into your life who educate you, but educate you in ways where you look and you recognize that's not right, that's not good, that's not fair. And I soon realized that most everything he said, most everything he did ran counter to who I knew myself to be, or at a minimum knew was good, is the only word I can think of.
Some of the kindest people I know some of the most big-hearted people I know have had a version of that in their life. You know, someone who tried to crush them in some way, who tried to squeeze them in some way.
Oh, and he was expert
Yeah.
at that. Expert.
Yeah, I said this to Ina Garten when I interviewed her. She had a difficult childhood also, and my father grew roses. And he would always plant roses in rocky soil as an experiment, just to see what would happen. He grew beautiful roses. And they wouldn't always bloom a lot, but there'd be one or two blooms that were just spectacular because they had to work extra hard to find the sun. And I think that that's what happens, you know, when people have that. And I think I'm glad you included that story because it helped me understand who you are. One of the other people that you write about is your grandmother. And they're Jehovah's Witnesses, which she was Jehovah's.
Grandma was a Jehovah's Witness.
Which meant that you were in the car with her when she was witnessing. And I wondered, when I was reading about this, and you say that witnessing in the country is different than it is in the city where you're just going and knocking on a series of doors. You're going down long country roads and visiting people. What did you learn in that experience that helped you become a journalist?
Well, so these are, again, among the earliest memories, and these stories were the ones I sat down and started writing in 2017. Because, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses in an urban environment, you hear the comedians joke, they pop from out of nowhere, knocking on your door, and everyone's hiding. But when you're a Jehovah's Witness in the country, and especially my grandmother who drove very slowly, you could see her coming for miles, if not minutes. And so, you know, my grandmother, you know, she made her own dresses. You know, she always made sure her wig was on right. She had her faux pearls. She had her purse crooked in her arm. And we would get out of the car at these houses. Sometimes there'd be brick houses. Most of the time, they would be these wooden ramshackle houses with people who lived in them, families who lived in them, who looked like their lives were just filled with toil, work and toil. And my grandmother comes in and asks them if they would like everlasting life and would they like to hear the word of Jehovah. And sometimes they would say no. Grandma would be very nice and we would leave, and other times they would say yes and we would stay. Like, Grandma didn't waste any time. You want everlasting life? We can start this right now with Bible study, get the watchtower out and everything. And I was, you know, Grandma's little helper. I mean, the name of the chapter title is Jehovah's Summer Intern. And so I would sit there, the northern kid, helping his grandmother read scripture to most people, and almost always African American. And most of the time, they could not read or write. But there we were. And in doing that, and going with my grandmother, and seeing how she interacted with these folks, and how she treated them, I mean, these are all lessons that you just sort of, you intuit. But Grandma never said, you know, there before the grace of God. She never said any of that, because we all knew, just because she had, you know, the wig was cocked right and the faux pearls and the nice simplicity pattern dress, sort of Grandma's implicit mantra was, don't get it twisted. You know, we are just maybe a half step better financially than the folks we're talking to. The other big thing that I took away and was the most indelible impression from all those visits was, in every household, there were 3 pictures on the wall, sometimes 4. And I took to calling them the Holy Black Trinity. Kennedy, King, and Christ. And there was sometimes a 4th photo, and that was of Robert F. Kennedy, which I didn't understand until years later that it should have been RFK instead of JFK, because it was RFK who was pressuring his brother to do right by the civil rights workers and folks doing voting rights acts down in the South. And so it was in that mix that I started my earliest understandings of race. A little bit of religion, but mostly race. And as I write in the book, as I was writing all of this, I realized, because it hit me, Grandma never went to a white person's home to witness. And I wondered, wow, why was that? And then I remember when you drive down to Severn, North Carolina, there is a marker. I remember passing it, took pictures of it. It's just a little marker, Nat Turner's Rebellion. And then I thought, wait a minute. And I went back and researched, and basically, Grandma was witnessing in the backyard of Nat Turner's Rebellion.
Southampton County.
Yes, and
Which
Severn
is not that far away from here. You can drive about an hour and 10 minutes and you're there.
Yeah, and so the ghosts of that rebellion were still there. That Grandma knew where she could and couldn't, or more likely shouldn't, go. And so that's my grandmother. When you read the stories about us going and witnessing, just know that that is the foundation of this book.
So can we just talk just a quick minute about those pictures that were hanging on every... I wondered, where did they get them? I mean, everybody had them.
Right.
It was in every house. If you were in Mississippi or Alabama or Chicago, I see people nodding their heads. Was there a salesman that went door to door that sold the pictures? Did they cut them out of the back of Ebony magazine? Everybody had it.
Everybody had them. Ebony, maybe the Jet.
The Jet. Well, they were too big for the Jet. The Jet was
Right. That's right. They had to have gotten them somehow. Maybe there was someone driving around saying, "Hey, the traveling salesman. You got your soap. You got your detergent. You want a picture?"
Or the church fan also. The fan on a popsicle stick.
Right. That's right. That was usually Christ.
Actually, sometimes it was Dr. King also.
Yeah, on the church fan.
On the church fan.
Well, instead of the picture, sometimes there would be the church fan of them on the wall, nailed to the wall.
Or either on a little thing that held it with two nails.
Right. Yes.
Take the fan off and go to Sunday, go to meeting, and take it with you, and then put it back in its little holding spot.
Right.
I love that you also write about. You write about your high school years. You write about being a preppy and a tennis player. And
It was the 80s,
so
don't forget.
the word popped collar is in there several times.
Right.
And you write about your entry into journalism, winning a Pulitzer Prize, and then going to work for the Bloomberg campaign. And I love that you included this because a lot of people don't know that you have covered politics, but you also have worked in politics. You have been a political practitioner of a successful campaign. And again, Lady Luck seems to have smiled on you in the way that it happened. But I'm glad you included this also because we often don't understand the inner workings of a campaign. And what was that like going back down memory lane in that case? Because you're writing about Mike Bloomberg. It's very different than the Mike Bloomberg we know. Bloomberg itself is very different than Bloomberg as we know it. Politics is very different as we know it. Right. So as you're trying to write about that, do you have to kind of decouple yourself from the current moment, which is odd, to go back to that moment so you can see it clearly but without the strange filters that you might have today?
Well, I mean, the great thing is when I wrote the chapter about going to work for Bloomberg, that was a few years ago. And these were stories that were so cemented that there was no modern day politics that I had to worry about infiltrating what I was going to write. How I got to Bloomberg, first I went to Bloomberg News and got to know one of Mike's lieutenants, Kevin Sheekey. And it just seemed like Kevin kept asking me questions about politics, and the rumors were already going around that Mike was thinking of running for mayor. And I was a national affairs columnist at Bloomberg. And so we're here in Washington for W's inauguration. And we're at Old Ebbitt Grill just talking, and he starts peppering me with questions again about, well, what about this and what about that? And I said, okay, you know what, Kevin? I've got questions for you. Because the rumors are he's going to run. So if that's the case, what's his position on this? What's his position on that? I kept peppering, and finally Kevin just said, that's what we were hoping you would help us with. And I was like, what? I said, okay. He said, yeah, he's going to run for mayor. We would like for you to come on the campaign and do policy.
And you had no idea.
No, none. So I said, I want to talk to Mike about this. He said, how about you do this? Read Bloomberg by Bloomberg, and then we can talk. So he gives me a copy of Bloomberg by Bloomberg, and I read it. And I read it with a journalist's eye, and particularly, before I got to Bloomberg News, I was on the editorial board of the Daily News, the New York Daily News, for 7 years at that point.
Where you won your Pulitzer.
Where we won the Pulitzer Prize. And so I'm reading it with this critical eye, like, you look at my book, it's got stuff in the margins. Oh my God, he's gonna get killed on this. Oh dear God. Just all the way through, and I just thought, holy smokes, this guy. I get to the end of the book. I'm in my bedroom, doors closed, I'm reading on the bed. I finish the book, and to no one in particular, I remember closing the book, looking up and saying out loud, he's gonna win. And so when we met, we had a meeting, he was very excited, please join the campaign. I'll skip the whole yada, yada, yada. I joined the campaign, and everyone thought that I was insane to join this campaign of this wildly wealthy man who switched parties from Democrat to Republican in order to run for mayor. And all sorts of stuff happened in between my joining the campaign, his official announcement, and Election Day, but he won.
It's such a great chapter. I can't wait for you all to read this because there were so many little, like the flashcards.
Oh, that was the
learning
best part.
Spanish, and Jonathan had to write flashcards for him.
He was learning Spanish using flashcards, and he loved flashcards. So Patty Harris, Mike's other lieutenant, said, so you need to make flashcards for Mike with all the stuff he needs to know about New York. And I was like, okay. So, and there were specifications for the cards and how many questions could be on there. And I made up the cards. I still have them.
Oh.
And what I was supposed to do, the mandate was you had to deliver a fresh batch of cards, but then I must swing by his desk unannounced and pepper him with questions. And the great thing about Mike is that you go up to the desk and you might ask him, what is the budget of the New York City public schools? And he'll get it wrong the first time. And then you come back maybe a few hours later, a couple days later, and you ask him another question, and maybe the second time he gets it wrong. You come back a third time, not only does he know the right answer, but now he is explaining to you going the next step. Like he's
a data dude. He really
he's
is
competitive, and he's very competitive. There's a great church story that I did not put in. I didn't put it in the book. I have to see if I did actually write it down, but it involves.
So maybe that would be an extra chapter at some point that you.
Maybe there is the
share with
paperback.
us. Yeah.
To come.
Yeah. I have two
Anyway.
more questions before we take questions from the audience.
And I'll be shorter.
And we'll do them quickly, but one I just want to share because it helps understand how you came to MSNBC, where we see you regularly, and where you just started a new show. But the way you got to NBC was so interesting. It involved an event. There's several people on the stage at the event. It's about climate change, I think. And someone turns to Chris Matthews, and they expect Chris Matthews to ask a question about climate change, and instead Chris Matthews says,
where are the black people? So there was a panel of Tucker Carlson, Claire Shipman, and
Tina Brown's husband.
well, he was Sir Harry Evans was the moderator. He was one of the people he tried to get to ask a question. But he writes for the New York Times, the columnist. Tom Friedman. The only person who should have been on that panel was Tom Friedman. But, which is why Sir Harry was trying to get the audience involved. And so he's trying to get them to ask questions about climate. He's not getting any takers. He goes to Chris Matthews thinking that Chris is going to light the room up with some great question, and he lit the room up by asking, where are the African Americans? And Sir Harry was flustered. What do you mean? He said, we are in a majority black city, and I'm looking at all white faces. Where are the African Americans? This is my first event in Washington, having moved down to Washington in 2007. And it's in a big ballroom. There are hundreds of people. The only other black person in the room who I had just met is clear on the other side of the room, and we locked eyes. Because I could not believe this was happening. And so Harry goes, well, how many African Americans do you have on your show? And Chris leans forward. Mind you, Chris's table is right here. I'm here, Chris is there. And he goes, not enough. We're always looking for African Americans to put on our show. The events move on. The event ends, and I get up and I walk over to Chris Matthews, and I say to him, oh, Mr. Matthews, Jonathan Capehart, I just want to say that was really incredible. Thank you for what you said. And he said, oh my God, I come to these things all the time and see the same old white faces. And for him to make that crack about me and my show, I'm always looking for African Americans to put on my show. That very day, I got my Washington Post business cards. And I had some in my pocket. And I reached into my pocket and I said, here, put me on your show. And he looks at the card and he says, Washington Post, what do you do there? And I said, well, I'm on the editorial board. I write about New Orleans rebuilding, but I'm going to be moving into politics. And he says, I don't have a card. Here's my email address. Email me your resume. I said, well, thank you, Mr. Matthews. Very nice to meet you. I go to the table, write down the email address he just told me, sent him my resume that night. About a week later, is that Chris calling? Making sure I get the story right? A week later, I'm CC'd on an email that Chris sends to his executive producer, Tammy Haddad, that says, impressive guy, book him on the show. I was booked on the show either later that week or the next week, and then every week after that, I was on MSNBC to the point now where that is
And now he's a franchise flagship
18
player.
years ago.
We're going to take questions, but there's just one passage I want you to read because it's about Washington, D.C.
Uh-huh.
It's on, at least in my big book, page
In this-
169.
Just that one paragraph?
Yeah. And then I want you to tell us if it still holds true.
Okay. My relationship with Washington and many of the people in it can only be described as complicated. In many ways, I love this town. After all, my career was saved here. I met my husband here. I have made some good friends here. Yet, I've never really felt that I fit in or belonged here. In my nearly 2 decades in this town, I've learned some valuable lessons I'm not sure I would have learned had I stayed in New York. The biggest being the one that pushed me to leave the Big Apple in the first place. Go where your talents are wanted.
Do you still feel like that in Washington? Because we in Washington claim you as a Washingtonian.
I mean, in all honesty, when I wrote that, and that was within the last year, I mean, yeah, I'd have to say there's still many times where I don't feel like I fit in this town.
Why?
I mean, part of it has to do with folks in our profession, the way folks in our profession in this town run in cliques and gangs, and if you're not in it, you're not in it. And so, look, I'm the only child of a widow, so I've always had to learn how to either make friends or be fine being by myself. And so I found through, hit or miss attempts to be fine being by myself, to the point when I met my future husband, he said to me once, Jonathan, I'm afraid you're becoming a recluse. And insisted that we have a party in my apartment, which I'm glad we did, because that's what I used to do in New York. You know, there are a lot of things that I did in New York that I didn't do once I got here, simply because this town didn't lend itself that way.
I think
to me.
people would be surprised to hear this because you carry yourself as life is a party and you are the host. You know, that you're at the center of things. You don't seem like someone who is an introvert or doesn't feel like they fit in. But I will say that it helped me understand you again, because sometimes when you're dwelling at the fringe, you see things that you don't if you're in the center. So there is a gift in that too. Let's bring the audience into this.
Great.
We have microphones. Raise your hand if you have questions. Right here.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm so happy to be here. I brought all my friends with me. One of the things I would like to know, because I've been watching you for years, and I wanted to know, how do you feel now about the current situation? Do you feel that the press is doing all they can, or are they, I feel they're a little bit capitulating to the administration, and what are your feelings on that?
Thank you. The current
Situation. I'm glad you narrowed it down to which part of the situation you wanted me to address. And I got this a similar question last night in San Francisco, and I think that our profession now, at the advent of the second Trump administration, is doing a better job than it did at the advent of the first Trump administration. But that doesn't mean that we are doing an optimal job. I think part of the problem our profession has is that we've been in chaos for years now. Chaos on a technological front, meaning folks aren't watching television the way they used to. They're not reading newspapers or magazines the way they used to. Our audience is diminishing in the traditional sense, but the audience is going somewhere else. And they're getting news somewhere else, and from people who aren't necessarily journalists. And so the profession has been trying to figure out, how do we get these folks back? How do we meet them where they are? That's the technological piece. Lay on top of that a president of the United States in the first term who was calling us the enemy of the people and having people turn on the press. And now we're in a second administration where he's saying all the same things, but now he's emboldened. And he is going after, he's suing CBS, he's suing ABC. And the actions that they've taken, they send a message to other journalistic outfits, and they act accordingly or don't. But I do think, and I will just zero in on the Washington Post, because that's where I work and what I know. I understand people were upset about the owner of the paper not wanting to make an endorsement in the presidential election. I understand people being upset and angry that he has said that he wants the opinions section to focus on personal liberties and free markets, and a whole host of other things that have happened in our section. But I have to remind all of you that at the newspaper, that is the one section of the paper where the publisher and the owner have free reign. We work for them. We report to them. And so if that's the direction that they want to go, or they say we should do this or do that, that is within their right. Where the line is if the owner of the paper says, pull back on your coverage of the president, or pull back on your coverage of the administration. That has not happened. And if it does happen, you are guaranteed that there would be an exodus from the news side of the Washington Post. And so I tell you that to say that is your benchmark. That will be your canary in the coal mine. And so far, and we've seen a lot of people leave the news side of the Washington Post. All the stars, if you will, have gone to other places. And yet, the news pages of the Washington Post are as aggressive as they've always been. And so, for those of you who are angry and may have, given up canceled your Washington Post subscription, I would encourage you to get it back. Because if you are really concerned about what's happening in the country and what's being done, the only way you're going to know is if you're reading the Washington Post and a bunch of other places. But I'm just talking about the Washington Post. So that's a small answer about that situation.
Yes, and as someone who left the Washington Post, I encourage people to continue to support the muscular journalism there. You have to follow your personal path and your personal light, and I did.
Right.
But you can't understand the world unless you take the time to read journalism. It is a hallmark of our democracy, and it does need to be supported. Let's
Right.
take a question from this side of the room.
Oh, this guy, poor guy right here. Here and there.
Why don't we go here and then come over?
Yeah.
Hi, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to see you with David Brooks or on any other show you're a panel with. And kind of the dovetail with the current situation, I have a question for you about communicating just with the American people. Do you as a journalist feel like it's more difficult to reach rural populations with information, especially in today's information environment, compared to your more densely populated urban and suburban areas? Do you think that presents sort of unique challenges? I ask because you must have some insight from when you were volunteering with your grandma as a Jehovah's Witness volunteer. So I'm curious how you can maybe relate that to what's going on today.
Well, that was decades ago, and a completely different media environment ago. But I take your point. There are a couple. The number one thing that sort of concerns me about access to news, particularly in rural areas, is the demise of local journalism, both print and television. There is the omnipresence of Fox News Channel. It is the #1 cable channel. Twofold. When we look at the ratings, we don't even bother to necessarily look at, how did we do compared to Fox? It's how did we do compared to CNN, because that's the closest we will get. But, Fox News doesn't necessarily do news when it comes to the evening programming. And this is how the administration has been very good about hoodwinking a lot of people who shouldn't necessarily be hoodwinked, but they're watching Fox News. And I think the third and more recently troubling thing to happen or will happen in terms of rural access to information and news is this $1 billion or so rescission that the president submitted to take money away from NPR and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is where we're going to see how into all of this Republicans are. Because for a lot of their constituents, it's the PBS station and the public radio stations that's where they're getting their news.
And the NPR stations.
Right. That's where they're getting their news and their information. And so if those cuts come through, and I've talked to folks who are on the board at CPB, they're really worried that rural stations are going to close. They're not so worried about the big urban stations. They're worried about the ones in the South. And what happens then? And so that's why it's important that if this does happen, that people need to start blowing up the phone lines at the Capitol, particularly to Republican Congress members, and saying, this is super important. This is really important. And one thing I heard in Austin, because they're very worried about this, a person asked this question, and I said, you know, if that happens, you guys are going to have to be prepared to step up and help save these stations. And she said, yes, I get that, but we also support all of these other public philanthropic news organizations. The impact that something like that is going to have on even smaller entities that are just barely getting by, but then their big donors are now focused on the big dogs, and then what happens to those super local efforts. So it's always been fraught, this business, this landscape, but given the administration that we have and just how aggressively they're pushing to, you know, take that chainsaw to public media, public radio, public television, we're still going to be going through a lot of tough times in this business.
We had a question over here while they passed the mic. I'm just going to address this if you don't mind also. There's two things I would say about that, is that you're absolutely right. For rural America, they do get a lot of their news from public television or public radio stations. And if you're a farmer on a tractor, you're more likely listening to NPR during the day. If you're raising kids in rural America, the educational programming that you get from public television is ancillary and very important to what you do. And we have to do a better job of covering rural America to win their support, to getting out of Washington and going to places and putting microphones in front of people and sitting down at kitchen tables. But for those of you who are in the room, you're probably here because you enjoy public television, because you enjoy public radio. We both, you know, have grown up in that soil. And what Jonathan said about using your fingers and using your phones to call members of Congress is important. All of those calls are logged.
Yep.
Every single one is logged. The last missive that they get at night is a notebook of all the calls. Every single member of Congress, every single senator gets that missive, and they do pay attention to that. So sorry for that soapbox, but there's a lot that's at stake in this moment. There was a hand that was up over here.
He's gotten shy. Oh. Everyone around him is like, ask that question.
Okay.
Could you say just a little bit about the changed editorial policy at the Post and how that is playing out on the pages of the Post, if at all?
I can't answer that question for a couple of reasons. One, I'm no longer on the ed board. Two, we still don't know what it means. And are you talking about the personal liberties and free markets mantra? I mean, we were told that that's what we're going to focus on, but we still have no idea what it means. And I don't think we will know what it means until there is a new opinions editor chosen. And from what I understand, they're going through the search right now, and you know, we may have a new opinions editor in the next few weeks or a couple of months. And I think it is whoever that person is will be the signal for what exactly it means. All we were told when our former boss, David Shipley, left was, don't know what it means, but keep doing what you're doing. And so I just keep doing what I'm doing.
Since you couldn't answer that question, just one last very quick question from Michelle right here.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to say thank you because my friends who are very interested in what's happening in the world today, we all say, we have to watch MSNBC because we have some brave voices who are telling us, or we believe that we're being told what we need to know. Whereas where we're watching other shows, it's like gotten really watered down, and let's do this, let's look at both sides, where there are no both sides with what's going on here. And thank you so much to you, because there are some of you, we watch more of some shows than others because of the brave voices. You have our support. Please don't start watering it down. We need to hear what's going on in the country. We don't need it watered down. And we applaud your bravery.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And always know that I can't speak for any other network, but at MSNBC, you know, I have a perspective show, which means that I am at liberty to say what I think about what we're reporting on. But whatever I say, either extemporaneously or in an intro, it has to be based in fact. It has to be based on reporting. And I can tell you that at MSNBC anyway, that you do not think for a moment that that is not taken seriously. That when shows are put together, it is, you know, where's the article, where's the column, what reporting have you done, what are you bringing to bear for the segment. So as long as we are able to do that, and we have a leadership, which we do at MSNBC, that supports what we're doing, you are guaranteed that there will be no watering down, there will be no backing off. There's only one profession that is protected in the Constitution, and that is the free press. And why is that? Because the founders know, and they knew, that a democracy is only as healthy and can only survive with an informed public, an informed citizenry. And so as long as I'm a journalist, and I'm sure as long as Michelle is a journalist, we take that role very seriously. We're not going to back off.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for your courage and your bravery as a journalist, as a broadcaster, as a scribe, as a wonderful human being, and as a best-selling author of this book, which is available for purchase in the back of the room. I have loved this conversation.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you all very much.